Sophia sighed as she stepped into the backyard sauna. The day's stress clinging to her like a heavy coat. She had looked forward to this moment all week. A rare sliver of solitude in the quiet heat. She wrapped her towel securely around her and settled onto the wooden bench, letting the warmth seep into her tense muscles. Victor, her husband, had installed the sauna shortly after their wedding 6 months ago. A gift meant to help her unwind after long workdays. It had quickly become her retreat, a place to escape the pressures of her demanding job and the complexities of her new role as a stepmother. Though she loved Victor deeply, blending their lives hadn't been without challenges. The largest of those challenges was Lucas, Victor's 22-year-old son. Handsome, confident, and clever, Lucas carried himself with a magnetic energy that made him the center of attention wherever he went. Sophia often found herself unsure of how to navigate their relationship. Lucas was polite, even friendly, but his intensity unsettled her. At family dinners, his dark eyes seemed to linger on her just a fraction too long. It wasn't anything overt, just a quiet undercurrent she couldn't quite name. She pushed the thought away. Lucas was family, and she refused to let her mind wander into strange territory. She closed her eyes, letting the steam wrap around her like a protective veil. The soft creak of the door made her jump. Her eyes flew open as Lucas stepped inside, a towel slung over his shoulder. His hair was damp, and he wore a faded gray t-shirt that clung to his toned frame. "Oh," he said, pausing mid-step. "I didn't realize you were in here." Sophia sat up straighter, her pulse quickening. "It's fine," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "There's room." He hesitated for a moment before nodding and taking a seat on the bench across from her. The sauna, which had felt so spacious moments ago, now seemed impossibly small. They sat in silence, the sound of condensation dripping from the ceiling punctuating the heavy stillness. Sophia focused on her breathing, willing herself to relax, but she was acutely aware of Lucas's presence. "You've been working a lot lately," Lucas said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. She glanced at him, surprised. "I guess I have. It's been a busy season." He nodded, leaning back against the wall. "Dad talks about you all the time. How hardworking you are. How much he admires you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "That's kind of him," she said, unsure how to respond. Lucas smiled faintly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It's not just him. I notice it too. You hold everything together. It can't be easy." Sophia felt a strange warmth at his words, though she couldn't decide if it was flattery or something more. "It's an adjustment," she admitted, "but we're figuring it out." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "You're better at it than I am. I've been difficult, I know." Sophia opened her mouth to reassure him, but the vulnerability in his voice stopped her. Instead, she said gently, "You're not difficult, Lucas. This is new for all of us. We're all learning." He looked away, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're kind. Too kind, maybe." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an unspoken energy. When Lucas shifted to adjust his towel, his hand brushed against hers. The touch was fleeting, accidental, but it sent a jolt through her. Sophia pulled her hand back quickly, her pulse racing. "I should go," she said abruptly, standing before he could respond. Lucas didn't stop her, but his eyes lingered, dark and unreadable. As Sophia stepped into the cool evening air, the heat of the sauna clinging to her skin, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, something she wasn't sure she could ignore. Sophia tried to forget the encounter in the sauna, but it lingered in her thoughts like a shadow she couldn't escape. Every time she looked at Lucas, she remembered the charged air between them, the brief touch that had ignited something she wasn't ready to face. She threw herself into work, staying late at the office and volunteering for extra projects. Yet, even the noise of her busy schedule couldn't drown out the memory. Victor, ever attentive, noticed her growing distance. "You've been distracted lately," he said one evening as they sat in the living room. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "I'm just stressed with work," she lied, forcing a smile. Victor nodded, accepting her answer without pressing further. "Maybe you and Lucas should spend some time together. He's been wanting to help with the neighborhood charity event. You could work on it together." Sophia's stomach tightened at the suggestion, but she nodded. "That sounds like a good idea." The next day, she and Lucas met at the community center to begin decorating for the event. The space was filled with boxes of supplies, streamers, lights, and banners waiting to be arranged. Lucas greeted her with his usual easy smile, and for a moment, she thought she could handle this. They worked side by side, hanging lights and arranging tables. At first, the conversation was light, focused on the task at hand. But as the afternoon wore on, the tension she had tried to suppress began to resurface. "You've been avoiding me," Lucas said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable rhythm they'd established. Sophia froze, her hands gripping a box of streamers. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he said, stepping closer. His tone was gentle but insistent. "Ever since the sauna, you've been different. I can feel it." Sophia's heart raced. She glanced around the empty hall, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone they were. "Lucas, this isn't appropriate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But I can't stop thinking about you. About us." "There is no us," she said firmly, though her resolve wavered under his gaze. Lucas stepped back, his expression torn between frustration and vulnerability. "I know this is complicated. I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you." Sophia looked away, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Lucas, I care about you, but this can't happen. It would destroy everything." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. "I understand." They finished the decorations in silence, the charged atmosphere between them now palpable. When they parted ways, Sophia felt both relief and an ache she couldn't quite explain. As she drove home, her thoughts swirled. She had drawn a line, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Lucas. It terrified her, but even more so, it thrilled her in a way she hadn't felt in years.
Sophia's relationship with Victor was unraveling, though he didn't seem to realize it. He continued to offer her quiet support, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her composed exterior. She hated the distance growing between them, but felt powerless to stop it. Her feelings for Lucas, confusing, forbidden, and undeniable, had taken root, and she didn't know how to uproot them. Victor noticed her unease one evening as they shared a quiet dinner. "You've seemed far away lately," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "Is something wrong?" Sophia forced a smile. "It's just work. Things have been overwhelming." Victor nodded, accepting her explanation, but his eyes lingered on her, filled with quiet worry. The guilt gnawed at her, yet she couldn't bring herself to confess the truth. That night, seeking solace, Sophia retreated to the sauna. The familiar warmth enveloped her, a temporary escape from the chaos in her mind. She leaned back against the wooden bench, closing her eyes, letting the heat lull her into a semblance of peace. The creak of the door shattered her momentary calm. She opened her eyes to see Lucas standing in the doorway, his expression hesitant yet determined. "I didn't think you'd be here," he said, stepping inside. Sophia's heart pounded. "Lucas, maybe this isn't the best time." "I think it's the only time," he interrupted, his voice low but steady. We can't keep pretending there's nothing here. She looked away, her pulse racing as he settled onto the bench across from her. The confined space felt suffocating, the heat amplifying the tension between them. Lucas, this has to stop, she said, her voice trembling. Whatever this is, it's not right. I know it's not, he said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. But I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either. Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. His presence overwhelmed her, his sincerity cutting through her defenses. She hated that he was right. You don't understand what you're risking, she said finally, her voice breaking. This could ruin everything. I understand, he said, his voice softening. And I'll stop if that's what you want. But I need to know, do you feel it too? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for far too long. Sophia closed her eyes, battling the storm inside her. When she opened them, Lucas was closer, his hand resting on the bench beside hers. I can't, she whispered, even as her resolve began to crumble. Before she could stop herself, her hand brushed against his. The electricity between them was undeniable, and for a fleeting moment, she let herself feel it. Lucas leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a tentative kiss. Sophia pulled back abruptly, her heart hammering in her chest. No, she said, standing quickly. This has to end. Lucas didn't stop her, but his expression was etched with both longing and resignation. As she stepped out into the cool night air, Sophia felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She had crossed a line, but she knew what she needed to do. The next morning, she confronted Victor. She didn't tell him everything, but she confessed to feeling lost and needing space to rebuild their connection. To her relief, Victor suggested counseling, a lifeline she hadn't expected. Lucas, sensing the shift, decided to move out for a while, giving Sophia the distance she needed. Though the feelings between them lingered, Sophia knew she had made the right choice. Some connections, no matter how powerful, were better left unfulfilled.